So yesterday we started by talking about the development of Congress. So that was in the bell ringer, and then of course the making laws activity. We talked a little bit before when we went over the basics of Congress about how laws are made. So hopefully you were able to get that completed. You just needed 3 sentences about what you already knew and what you didn't, 3 for each. And so today we'll talk about just the last 2 slides about the development of Congress and then some of the benefits and problems of Congress that occur as well. So let's start with the 20th century Congress, the 1900s. And probably some of the most significant earlier activity is that Congress was isolationist. Congress was isolationist. So after we were done with World War I, they of course wanted to go back to normal. They didn't want to be involved in the world after that. And so despite the fact that Woodrow Wilson wanted to get in the League of Nations, the Senate said no. So isolationists. Another change, though, would be starting after the election in 1932, New Deal Democrats started to pass economic legislation. New Deal Democrats started economic legislation. The reason why that was a change is because in the past, a lot of people thought the government shouldn't get involved in the economy, but obviously the seriousness of the Great Depression changed a lot of people's minds. And so they often supported FDR. They rarely ever said no to what FDR wanted while he was in office. The only exception would be when he asked to increase the size of the Supreme Court, obviously to put more of his own allies on it. The Congress said no. So that was really the only major exception. Then, of course, in the 50s, Congress became consumed with un-American activities. And of course, the most significant of those would be communism. And 2 of the most famous people involved in this from the House would be Richard Nixon, known for his anti-communist rhetoric, and of course in the Senate, Joe McCarthy. Nixon was a lot more careful. He obviously had his political ambitions to become president someday. So he wasn't as reckless as McCarthy, but McCarthy basically started accusing everyone. Now, he was right some of the time, but of course, if you point to a crowd of 1 million people and say there's a communist out there, chances are you're going to be correct. But he also ended up accusing a lot of innocent people, going as far to say that the army was infiltrated by communists. And of course, since many Americans had served in World War II and were veterans, that's when he started to fall out of favor. But Congress continued, of course, to spend, including in the 1950s, on transportation, making the modern interstate road system. But that also introduced lots of opportunities for members of Congress to include what we call pork, special little projects that are only good for them and their local voters. And of course, when Richard Nixon became president, Congress started investigating the Watergate scandal, believing that the president was trying to cover up the fact that some of his campaign members broke into the Democratic headquarters at the Watergate Hotel. And they were just on the precipice, just within a few days of voting to impeach him, but they didn't get that chance. President Nixon ended up resigning before the House impeached him. So he is not one of the presidents who has been impeached. But Congress believed that the president had become too powerful, and so one of the things they also did was they passed the War Powers Act. The War Powers Act. This meant that the president, after 60 days, had to ask permission for continuing to use troops. That still gives him a big leeway of a couple months, but needless to say, it at least did try to restrain the president's activity. So in the modern day, in 1994, Republicans took back control of Congress. Now, the reason why that's significant is because most of the time between 1932 and 1994, they did not have control of the Congress. Most of the time it was Democrats. So it was significant because, in the past, maybe if Republicans could get in power, they would only be there for 2 years. But really, starting in 1994, Republicans would show that they were more competitive over the long run. Probably the most significant people that helped make this happen was a guy named Newt, N-E-W-T, Gingrich, G-I-N-G-R-I-C-H. Newt Gingrich. And the reason why I mention his name is because he's often still on TV quite a bit. He was the Speaker of the House. Newt Gingrich. G-I-N-G-R-I-C-H. Newt Gingrich really helped focus their message. He wanted to concentrate on balancing the budget, lowering taxes, and decreasing regulation. Balancing the budget, lowering taxes, and decreasing regulation. And that's really, at least the last two of those, are something the Republicans are active with. They still talk about balancing the budget, but only when there's a Democrat that's president. Anyway, the last items I want to point out here, of course, is the House did impeach Bill Clinton for committing perjury. He lied under oath about having an affair. So the House did impeach Bill Clinton. The Senate didn't agree that it was a serious enough crime, though. And Nancy Pelosi became the first female Speaker of the House. This would be the first time she held it. And of course, this is the second time she's held that position. P-E-L-O-S-I. P-E-L-O-S-I. So now let's just talk about some benefits and problems of Congress. Problems. Well, first, you can say this is a good thing or a bad thing, but legislating or making laws is slow. So, for instance, obviously the nation is suffering because of the pandemic, but it takes sometimes weeks and weeks for Congress to pass laws. Second one would be that lobbyists, which is spelled Lobbyists, Lobbyists, lobbyists can sway congressmen. Lobbyists can sway congressmen. What is a lobbyist? A lobbyist is someone who works for a company or organization, like the NRA, for instance, and they say to congressmen, please vote against this gun law, and if you do, I'll donate lots of money to your campaign. That's perfectly legal, but some people say that that is unfair because some organizations and companies have more money than others and can obviously sway congressmen pretty easily. And then, of course, there's pork, special projects.
Is that like an acronym?
No. Special projects that really only help small areas. They help get congressmen elected, but some say it's unfair if you're installing some new sidewalks in a small town in Nebraska. It's not really fair for people in Maine to pay for that with their tax dollars, just so the congressman can get reelected. Plus, there's also debt. It's over $20 trillion of debt, and we add over $1 trillion a year to that now. Another problem is that incumbents, INCUMBENTS, that's INCUMBENTS, incumbents can easily win re-election. So incumbents are people already in office. They can easily win re-election. So people don't think it's competitive enough. Another problem is that gerrymandering occurs. Gerrymandering is GERRYMANDERING. GERRYMANDERING. Gerrymandering occurs. That's when parties change the districts on the map to benefit their own party the most. So if you know there's a congressman from the opposite party, you take his district and you split it up into pieces and throw them in with other ones. So that way he can't get reelected. Some people think that's unethical. And of course, there are problems for the actual people in Congress. It's difficult to maintain two households, one where you're from and one in Washington, D.C. There's dozens of members of Congress that actually sleep in their offices for that reason. And plus, it obviously involves a lot of time. If you're not working in Congress on committees or voting on laws, then you probably should be back in your home district, constantly meeting and greeting local voters at town hall meetings and country fairs and all kinds of other things. So that way you remain relevant and the people like you and you can get reelected easily. Plus, if you're a new member of the House, for instance, you have to, for your party, go to their headquarters and be involved in what's called phone banking. You have to make hundreds and hundreds of calls every year to ask for donations. So it's an incredibly difficult position to keep. And some benefits, though, of course, is that expenses are paid for, including mail, which is known as a franking privilege. You do, of course, get around $180,000 a year salary. And you have broad amounts of power. In the Constitution, there are things called elastic clauses. Elastic means they can be stretched around anything. So, for instance, there's a place in the Constitution where it says Congress can do anything that is necessary and proper. Well, that could cover everything. You could say it's necessary to buy every American an ice cream cone. So, some of those elastic clauses do allow Congress a lot of power. Some powers are clearly expressed, like the power to tax, but others are implied. So some say you don't have to look at the Constitution literally. Congress can actually have more power based on what is implied in it. And some people don't like that. But these are just some of the benefits and problems of Congress. Tomorrow we will finish by talking about the other legislatures, including the state legislature, for instance. Don't forget about the making laws activity. Hopefully you were able to look at that infographic and find 3 things that you did know and 3 things that you didn't that you can type into the text box once you click submit. And for the rest of the period, you can, of course, work on anything from units 3 or 4. So work on the reading from the 4th unit, the public policy assignment, the videos, or today's activity, making laws, or if you want to go back and work on anything from Unit 3, you can do that as well.